Welcome, everyone, to Operations Nation's conversation with Aviv Bergman, who is the co-founder and CEO of Gluework. But don't be fooled, he's not only a CEO and co-founder, but he's a very seasoned operations professional. So we'll get started in a bit with what I like to call a fireside chat. But Aviv has pointed out there is no fire, so it's not truly a fireside chat. But for those of you who don't know, Operations Nation is a digital content hub that's designed to showcase the operations people, systems, and processes that power our ecosystems businesses. So we're very excited about having a conversation around operations and curating content and hosting events that really push forward the conversation around operations. So today, our focus will be on getting to know Aviv as an operations professional, celebrating the experiences he has, and then having a conversation about operations as an industry, both the past, the present, and the future. So with no further ado, I am going to kick it off by asking Aviv a few questions to get to know him better. So Aviv, to kick it off, how did you get to be where you are today? Tell us about your professional journey as an operations professional, and when did you know that operations was something you wanted to pursue?
Yes, first of all, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be part of this community, and I must say in advance that I truly believe that communities like Operations Nations and others has an important role in our ecosystem today. So again, thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. About my professional journey, I didn't really know that operations is my destiny, and to be honest, it was kind of accidental. In my previous career, I was serving as an officer in the Israeli Navy for 8 years, and then my first real job was in consulting. But I knew that what I really wanted to do is to be in the tech industry. I really wanted to work in startups. I didn't really aim for a specific domain, but since I also didn't have any specific knowledge or skill set, I was looking for an entry-level position in a startup. I was lucky enough to be hired as a business development manager for a healthcare startup, and I was the youngest employee in the company. So it's obviously led me to be kind of an all-around player, from project management to personal assistant, literally everything. But then I moved to New York. I met a great group of Israeli founders of an early stage startup named Taylor Brands. And after spending some time with them, they offered me to join as the first ops person of the company. And actually, it was the first time that I was introduced with this title, operations. And I remember asking, what is operations? Obviously, after saying yes, because it would sound a great opportunity, but I asked, what is operations? And the CEO told me that my role is to take care of the company. He always mentioned, like, keep the boat floating. And as time evolved, I became VP operations for Taylor Brands. I had an active role in the company's impressive growth, but I was responsible for different teams and domains in the company as time evolved, from finance to HR, admin ops, customer success, and more. And I kept asking myself, what is operations? Like, what will be my next role? I felt that from one hand, this is very general, but from the other hand, it's very specific to the company that I work for. And then ops might be different from one company to another. And I think in general, you would hear me say it a lot, but this generalist approach, this get things done mentality, this was really paved my way to career in operation. And it was hard for me to say it out loud, but here I am saying it. I'm a generalist and not a specialist. So I kept, exploring different roles. I remember, going to those jobs websites, typing in operations, reading job descriptions for different positions. It was already like 4 years ago, but I could feel something is happening in the world of operations. I saw that bigger companies are looking for operators, but within the departments, not necessarily in the management level, jobs like biz ops and sales ops and product ops. And I continued my career focused on business operations, which turned to be revenue operations with the time. And I did some other ops roles in fast growing startups. So if I can summarize it, I tried to lever my generalism and my passion to operations. And I had amazing experience working in different startups on different stages as an operator across the board.
Thanks so much for sharing. And could you highlight, because you've had some really interesting roles, ranging from director of business operations, you focus more on revenue operations. Which role would you say was your favorite? And you can define what made it your favorite role.
So it's hard for me to choose, but I can say that being VP operations for an early stage startup is a very exciting role because you literally see everything. You touch everything, every aspect of the company. But I would say that as time evolved and I was focused more on revenue operations, it was the place that I really felt the impact on the bottom line of the company. Like you see how better operations really change the revenue and really move the needle for those companies. So I enjoyed all of the positions in different stages. And I think it's obviously important to have operators in all of the stages.
Okay, great. I'd love to hear some of the lessons that you've learned. I think for all of us who are on the call who have been in operations, no one role is ever the same. So would love to hear what are some of the lessons that you've learned and how they shaped your ops career or your career in general.
Yeah, I would say that the first lesson, and I just mentioned this generalism, but generalism is a blessing. It's not a curse. Companies do need those like all around players, wear many hats people, project oriented people. I think they're playing an important role on the way companies are growing today and their ability to scale. And I would say that the second lesson that, by the way, also led me to start Gluework is that although we tend to think that operations is really different from one company to another, but operations is more or less the same thing. And indeed, it does require a specific skill set. I'm happy that companies today understand it. And we definitely can see it by the current demand in the market for operations people. It's constantly growing across the board. I would say that the third and the most important is that operations is important. Companies that invest and hire ops people from day one can overcome those growing pains faster. And good operations approach is critical on the company's abilities to scale. I think those are the lessons that I've learned.
Is there anything that you would have done differently? So one of the things that we often talk about or we're trained to as professionals is to celebrate all of our many successes, but would love to hear, like, were there any moments or like points of failure where you just really, really felt like things didn't go well and, you wish, it's something you could have done differently? Trying to nudge you into a bit of vulnerability here.
I would say that, and this is part of my mission today in Gluework, but I think operations is a thing that is hard to measure. Like if we're trying to understand what exactly is our role, we're building processes, right? We're adopting changes. But in the end of the day, you're building, let's say, a process and you're implementing the process and you're celebrating this amazing process, but it's very hard to measure whether like in 3 months or 6 months, there is really an impact. So I definitely built bad processes in my life. I definitely brought, I always thought that another tool is the answer. I remember myself trying to bridge the gap between two different teams in the company. And always my thought was, let's get another tool, like a project management tool or collaboration tool, that everyone can work on the same tool. But in the end of the day, I was always adding more tools to the tech stack, which in fact sometimes complicated the operations. So, but again, I think measuring operations is hard. It's not really something that is intuitive, but I think as time evolves and technology evolves, there is definitely ways today to measure operations and therefore to reduce the failures in bad processes.
Okay, got it. So some sound bites from this portion. Being a generalist isn't a curse, thank God. That's reassuring to me. operations is really hard to measure the success of it. So I would add on to that. It's really helpful if it's not being defined for us, that, I would say we as operations professionals have to define what success looks like to us, whether that metric is operational efficiency or it's, the reducing the number of fire drills per day, per week, per month.
Exactly.
So both quantitative and qualitative. And I really liked your last point. Adding more tools doesn't always help. I think a lot of us kind of think, oh, well, there's this big suite of SaaS software available at my fingertips, so maybe I just need to install another software or get that into my business. But yeah, I think we'll talk more about helpful software as we go on. Okay, but back to you. This is one that I find really interesting. And for some of you listeners, you may have attended an internal community event we did about kind of life after being a COO or a director of ops. One of the pathways is becoming an entrepreneur or founder yourself, and then kind of stepping from that head of ops or COO role into being a founder or co-founder and CEO. So I'd love to hear from you, Aviv. How have you found that transition from your series of operational leadership roles into being a co-founder and CEO?
Yeah, it's definitely a great question. I was always seeking for the depth behind operations. So I always spoke with other operators to hear about the work. I joined communities like Ops Nation and others just to expand my knowledge and my network. So in general, I can say that I always felt that ops is critical, but not getting the right attention in companies. And after speaking with many ops folks, I just saw the trends. I felt the needs. I discussed the mutual pains with other operators, and I decided, to take my experience to start a company that will put operations in the spotlight. And this is what we're doing in Gluework. We're building a product for operators to monitor companies' operations and processes and to help companies scale in more sustainable way. But, I will keep my advice, further down, but I think for me, it was a natural transition. And I always like to say that the CEO is the senior operator of the company. Every CEO must be an ops person, first of all, because you need to operate this thing called a business. But obviously, I just started to test this thesis recently, so I'll keep you posted on the results.
I'm laughing not at you, but I'm smiling because I think it's a dirty little secret that we COOs kind of sometimes I'm not going to swear on this webinar, but we may say unkind things about our beloved CEOs who may not appreciate all of the operations that we do and the work that we put in, to make things run smoothly. So I think it's really actually very valuable, and I am excited about seeing more COOs and ops leaders become CEOs, because I think they will have that empathy and true understanding of what it takes to run a company. However, one downside is I worry that, and I'm experiencing this myself, becoming a co-founder of Operations Nation, along with Astrid and Ashrina, is that, there's a tendency to also really want to get down in the weeds, whereas I see the role of the CEO as needing to be very visionary and bold and dreaming of everything that is possible and really selling a big vision, to your customers, to your partners, and to your investors if you have them. And I worry sometimes that ops people are a little bit too realistic, a little bit too honest. And That's so true. Sometimes we don't make the best salespeople. So my last question before we go to the advice section is, do you ever catch yourself being a little too realistic or operational, especially when you're, playing the CEO role and fundraising and selling the dream?
First of all, 100%. Yes. I think the challenge here is for me personally, it's a bit different because, my co-founder is always telling me that, I know how to do operations and I need to teach myself on other things as well, because this is the role of the CEO is also to do other things. So in terms of the operations of the company, I got it. Like I know exactly what should happen, and I have the experience of doing this. But again, also being a CEO, I'm doing this for a few months now, so it's a learning journey, and you're learning every day new things. It's obviously helps when you have this experience of like knowing how things should work, but it's also important to put the operation aside and even think about that someday someone would come and take the operations for me, this is something that I'm still struggling to think, who would I be able to give this, the keys to the operations. So again, it's a learning progress, but yeah, definitely being a CEO operator has some downsides sometimes.
Well, at least you have a co-founder to balance you out. And
For sure.
as I always say, it's important for whether they're two co-founders or the CEO and the COO. If one person is, constantly got their foot on the accelerator, there should be someone who's like applying pressure on the brake. And there's also needs to be someone who's kind of the gear shifter. I don't personally drive manual, but being an American, but you get the idea of having a balance of two people.
Of course.
Wonderful. So let's move on to the advice section, because we know that we have some attendees who are at different phases of their ops career. So I would love to just start off by asking you, what advice would you have? And we had one Q&A question, particularly like, what advice would you give to a 20-something-year-old in ops, as they're figuring out their ops career pathway? And then specifically, I really like this, how do you make your impact felt by your team? So kind of two-part questions, general advice on figuring out your ops career path, and then specifically, whilst you're doing that, how do you really shine and show people what you're doing?
Yeah, I think if I would have to give advice, I would give it, to myself when I was 20 something and in the beginning of my operations career. So, if I could run back in time and give myself an advice, I would say, remain curious. This is probably the most important thing. Take as many projects as you can. It will only help you to learn more and get wide perspective on how things work. And maybe this is the most important, don't over-index on the job description. Again, as I said, I think generalism is a blessing. And I think, in regards to the second part of the questions, focus on the value that you're providing to the company and always try to maximize it. And if you would focus on the value of this things that you're doing and disconnected from, this is not in my job description, this is not what I was supposed to do, but just stay focused on the value and understand that there aren't a lot of people in the company, when you think on a classic company structure, that can do everything. They can help in marketing, they can help in operations, they can help in finance, they can help in planning events, and the ops people can do it. And companies very fast will understand that you're valuable, that you're essential, that you're an all-around player, and this will also pave your way, to take more important roles in the company. This definitely the advice.
I love this advice, but I'm also going to push back just to be a bit contentious with you. So I think that operations can be this double-edged sword, right? So we, on one hand, we're Jacks and Jills of all trades. We're often Swiss Army knives. You need a knife, I've got one. You need scissors, I've got one. You need a toothpick, I've got one. So I agree that one of the things that makes us so valuable as, a collection of tools is that we're versatile and we're all arounders. But I wonder sometimes if actually then we're kind of taken for granted because we're constantly, filling in the gaps. And so it's like, oh, Charlene, what are you really good at? Because, you do a little bit of marketing ops, you do a little bit of customer ops here. And, so when we do so many things, I worry sometimes that because we're generalists, we get known for just being fixers, but then especially as you grow in your ops career, you have to make that choice of, do I continue being a generalist and a jack or Jill of all trades, or do I double down and say, actually, I'm going to be like a VP of customer success or a VP of revenue ops, and I know in your career, you also kind of went to more of a specialty. Yeah. So I'd just love to hear if you have any thoughts of like, yeah, how do you find that balance between being a generalist and getting the most out of it, but then also knowing when to play to your strengths and kind of focus and double down on, say, a ops specialty like revenue ops, which I think happened to you?
Yeah, I think it depends on the company's growth trajectory, because as companies grow, they open more departments, they open more teams, they change the definitions of other teams. So I think if you're involved in this strategy work of where the company should go, you can also build yourself your next role. And if you bring the value in a specific domain like customer success, you can be the ambassador that comes to the CEO or any other executive and tells, I think we need customer success operation, and this is what I want to do because I bring the experience. So I'm not saying always stay in this generalist approach, but I think it gives you a good opportunity to pave your way to something that you really want to do. And just in case that you fell in love with something, I specifically managed to find value and even passion in the world of revenue ops. I just felt that this is the domain that I need to focus at. So I navigated myself and, I presented data. I learned about this domain. And then I came to the company. They were not looking for a revenue ops leader, but I said, hey, there is a new thing in the world. It's called revenue operation. It's not just a title. This is the job description that I want to take on myself. And since I did the generalist thing all around in the past year, I want to suggest myself to this specific role. So in fact, I paved my way doing it from this generalism.
Okay, great. I'm seeing some questions come in from the audience. I think people are really resonating with this generalist versus specialist. So I'm going to stay there. So, okay, one is, I think let me go with Meredith's question, and then I'll go to kind of like how you upskill. Actually, let me reverse that. Sorry, I'm doing this on the fly. So we have one question, which is, are there suggestions you have on specific areas that generalists should upskill themselves on, and how? And so I think this person had kind of suggested, is it, maybe compliance or data analysis. So I guess see how you want to interpret this, but like, I think the implication is, do you believe that there are technical skills that would be helpful to make a generalist even more valuable to a business? And I guess we may be going a little bit into the industry evolution, but we'll go with it.
I do think that data is probably a required skill. And I think that the modern operator must think and understand data, but I'm not talking necessarily on engineering skills, more about like the data-driven decision-making approach. And again, this is what we're doing in Gluework, and I'll be happy, to double down on this furthermore. But I think I wouldn't recommend on, going into learning how to code and how to build, data reports and dashboards. But again, if you understand data, if you're constantly asking questions on data, on the company's data, on the tools, and you're trying to base your recommendations on data, this would make you a better operator. And it's a skill you need to pursue along like the other skills, which are more like the soft skills.
Okay. And then I think a good follow-on question was one from Meredith, which was, how do you separate? Okay, I think this is for me, like what I would call operations, which is like the art of figuring out how to manage your own operations, like in your role. So how do you separate operational work from work that requires domain expertise? So for example, like if you're trying to improve sales operations within a company, you've got sales strategy at the macro level, but you've also got like operational processes that help drive like the sales cycle internally and externally. And this can often get untangled and then be really confusing for someone who's like trying to drive both, match to strategy corporate wise, but also like implement processes. So I don't know if you have any advice for how to separate strategy and like operational execution.
I would say about this if we're talking about sales process, for example. So the operator should orchestrate and understand the process and, strategy from one hand, the results from the other hand. But in fact, you don't really need to know how to do sales in order to be a good sales operator. You need to understand the initiatives. You need to understand the tools. I would say, by the way, if we're talking about soft skills, I would definitely say communication skills is probably, the most important skill for an operator, because you need to work with people and to see their work. So when I've built sales processes, and I never did sales before I was doing sales processes, I asked salespeople, how do you do a sales process? Where do you get the lead from? How do you do the call? And I joined them. I asked to join them for calls, and I sat on calls. And I remember building playbooks for sales, and I was asking the salespeople to do, insane things. You need to record the call, you need to prepare the call in advance, and you need to summarize the call, and then you need to log it on Salesforce, and you have so many like operational tasks around this thing called a call. But just when I saw how they're doing this, I said, okay, the process that I built is not helping them. It's just making it hard. So again, I think the difference between being a specialist in this case to being a generalist, that you're not the one doing the sales calls yourself. You're just building the process. You understand what's working and what's not. You're asking the people what's working for them. And again, I will come back again to the data thing. Once you really understand the data and you build the KPIs, you can start measure and see if the process that you've built makes sense and if it helps, and then to adjust it. Really have to do the sales call itself. So again, I hope it answers the question.
Well, if you feel like any of the questions aren't being answered, feel free to continue chatting, and we can come back to that. But thank you so much for that. I think that's really helpful. And maybe this is a good segue into, I feel like there's still this trend and people are craving to hear a bit more about how we show the impact that we add to our businesses. So could you maybe give a concrete example of like in that supporting the sales team and doing sales ops? Was it very clear afterwards of the impact that you made? So like, did you feel like you got credit? Because this is what I see sometimes happening in the startups I work with, is that like you do all this work as the supporting ops person to drive improvement in processes, et cetera. But at the end of the day, their metric is the key one, right? So the sales is ultimately accredited to the sales team. You don't always get credit if you're like the sales ops person or the revenue ops person, or maybe that's just been in the companies where I've worked. So I'm curious, like in that example, was success from those improvements in process, were they credited back to you as a revenue ops person, or is it the sales team who just got all the glory? And I'm being a bit cheeky.
First of all, it's hard. I mean, hands down, it's hard to measure the value. And sometimes the value is just, people are saying good things about you. Like, oh, without Aviv doing this process, we wouldn't be able to do it. And it takes time. If we're looking on sales processes, it takes time to measure this impact. It's not that you're implemented a new process and 2 weeks after everything is changing. I would say that I hope I'm not offending any salesperson if he is on this conversation, but I always like to say that for a salesperson, the process of the sale is done when the contract is signed. Customer signed the contract, sales process done. But for the operator, it could be just the beginning of another process, because a signed contract should be countersigned both sides. It should be filed in the right folder. We should start, the implementation process. We should start the customer onboarding and the customer success process. So there are a lot of other processes, and I think revenue operations as a movement is trying to take all of those siloed processes into one umbrella of revenue, because it all matters. In the end of the day, you can close the deal, but if the customer is not satisfied from the customer onboarding process, he will churn. And I think the value here is to really show how, and again, just talking about revenue operations in this case, how the customer life cycle is streamlined, is efficient. We're not losing deals. Customers are happy, and everyone is aware. And I think when there is a good process and the operator is doing his work, everybody feels it. Unfortunately, a lot of companies understand it when this operator is leaving. And I guess some of you felt this, that like the operator is leaving, and then like suddenly there is a chaos. There is like nobody know what's happening. Nobody know how to do things. But again, I think it's pre-COVID for sure, because as an operator, I was being in the office and people just called me all day, like, how should I do this? How should I do that? How should I do that? And then during COVID, of course, like Slack and things like this, I remember as an operator, just my Slack was all the time full with, how should I do this? Can you point me to the right version of this sales deck, because we can't find it. So it's very hard to measure the impact, but definitely people and executives can understand it. By the way, especially executives. I mean, I think executives understand the value of an operator because he is the go-to person. They always ask him the question regarding everything. But yeah, it's hard to measure. I do understand it. Again, it's part of like an approach that we're trying to promote at Gluework, of like connecting all the processes into a very visual place that you can measure that the process was broken 3 months ago, but now it was solved due to a change that the operator implemented in the process.
Super interesting. Yeah, I worry sometimes that people don't appreciate how valuable we are to our companies until we're gone and it's a bit too late. So I guess some of the advice I would pass on is, that even though a lot of ops people were very generally pretty humble people, we're not motivated a lot by ego and recognition. It would be, I think we could do a lot to just be more vocal about the impact that we're making. And so, something tangible. It's like, if you solve, 50 internal tickets, so to speak, whether it's Slack questions or whatever, like somehow telling your manager or your VP or escalating that to the CEO level, if like should be something we talk about more, because I don't think people don't want to recognize the work that we're doing. I think half the time, or most of the time, they're just not aware of how many questions we're answering, how many, things we're troubleshooting or fixing. And so I think we just need to be a bit more open about how much we're helping, even if it feels a little bit like, hey, look at me.
I really think data is the answer here, because if you're collecting the data and the trends, and you can show to your manager, you can show to the CEO, you can start measuring operational efficiency and really point to the specific changes. Like, let's take a process and you're putting a KPI on this process of, let's call it operational efficiency, people that are complete the next task within the internal SLA, for example. So you can show that when you start measuring it, it was 50% completed or compliance. And when you implement those changes, look, now it's 80%. So you can show the trend. So I would say, and again, this is something that we can talk about later, but this firefighting mentality of let's solve the current problem is a problem today, I think, in operations. And operations people should think more about the strategy and not just to solve today's problems, but really think about like the future. And measuring the trend and using the data is really important component of it.
Okay, awesome. Well, I definitely want to segue very quickly, given the time, to your reflections on the industry, some of which is embedded into our conversation naturally. But just on the advice piece, are there any resources that have really inspired you and helped you to develop professionally, either in your ops career or now as a founder? What are some of the, either your favorite books or podcasts or sources of information that have been helpful to you and that you would recommend to other operations professionals?
I would 100% say the communities. No book or podcast, but the communities. I'm not kidding. Like communities like Ops Nation and others, I think, I met so many people in my position with the same questions, with the same dilemmas. And getting to know more ops people, talking to them, sharing the challenges and the solutions, this would really help me build my career in operations. Talk with other operators, ask what they're doing, get advice. Don't be shy to post a question and say, "Hi guys, I'm building a model for XYZ in the company. Do you have any recommendation?" You would be surprised how much people are willing to share and to help, and this is amazing. So I think the best resource would be the communities, and not any blogs or podcasts without the context. You need the context of the other side.
Awesome. And I promise we did not, this was not
No,
a question. We're obviously very, very passionate about communities, and that's where we started, and that's where Operations Nation was born. So, I mean, I couldn't echo that enough, is finding your tribe, finding people who really understand what you're going through. And regardless of, as Aviv said, regardless of the industry, stage of company, your exact role or level, there's some fundamental things about operations that you'll find wherever you go. And it's really helpful to find a support network of people who you can ask questions of it and share information with.
And don't be shy, because it's kind of a safe place to ask about your own professional challenges. Like, I have a meeting with my manager and I want to talk with him about job title. What job titles would you recommend if I'm doing in the company this? So you will be surprised how many people are willing to help and with their experience, and it really helps. So it's not just on the professional things, but also on the personal perspective.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. And I hope that everyone who's listening in has found some bit of advice helpful from Aviv. And so now let's transition from kind of the micro and the journey of the ops professional to more of the macro. And would love to hear your reflections on the industry. So we're going to frame this as sort of past, present, and future. So would love to kick it off by hearing, how have you seen operations evolve? And I feel like, so you want to say like, 100 years ago, but basically like, how has it evolved, particularly over the last decade, as operations kind of risen and the roles of operations have become more prominent, and there's been just many more of them hired in the tech industry. What do you think have been some of the good things that should be preserved into the present, and what kind of thinking might be outdated and should be kind of left in the past? So let's start with looking at the past, and then we'll move into the present.
I think there is like a timeless component in operations, which is like the generalism and the cross functionality. And I think the operator role and responsibility is to wear many hats according to the company's needs, to execute accordingly. And I think if you would ask operations people 5 and 10 years ago, what is operations, it was very hard to explain. And the answer that you would get, that it's a little bit of everything, but it's very strategic. And I think that in the past, founders used to hire ops people when they're big enough, or they felt that they need more control on a growing business. And today, companies are growing faster than ever. They are siloed than ever. And therefore, founders and leaders understand that they need to adopt, this ops approach much earlier in the business, and to hire ops people to operate I would say in the department level or even in the team level. So if in the past was ops is the CEO, COO, now ops is the head of customer success ops, the head of product ops. And they're the same operator, but within the department in an earlier stage. So I think this is the difference from the past.
Got it. Yeah, so we're seeing some, I hear a couple things as themes. There's sort of like this delayed approach, which is like, oh, things are hitting the fan, so now I need an ops person to come in and clean it. But now we're seeing in the present, ops roles are thought of from the very beginning. I mean, I think there's still some controversy around like startups thinking they need a COO or not. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Kind of like, when do you need to build, an ops team or have someone who's more than kind of a entry level ops person getting stuff done. But yeah, I think it's definitely becoming embedded in the fabric of companies. And yeah, I'm putting in my little plug is I firmly believe that the sooner that a founder starts thinking about operations in their business model, in their team structure, like actually that investment early on as a foundation is going to pay off in the long run. And I think you will see the companies that failed to hire operations people early on are actually the ones who are most likely to fail and not make it from 0 to 1 or past the pre-seed or seed stage. But anyway, so moving on to kind of present, let's reflect, like, where are we now? And I know you started talking about this. How do you see the field? Is there more respect across the board? And are there gaps so in the present that are still lacking? And then we can kind of transition into what you think the future of operations will look like.
Yeah, I think that what's happening currently, first of all, it's a great movement. Starting from communities that talking about operations. I'm not sure it was exist like 10 years ago, but I think this overall trend of like hiring people early into the departments and developing methodologies like RevOps, Product Ops, and HR Ops. This is a great movement. This is changing the way companies are handling scale. But I do want to say, you asked about the gaps, that ops people became, because of this, kind of more tactic driven. We mentioned like the firefighting approach. And I think ops people can and should do more than just the tactics. They must be more strategy driven and to think about the future of the company and just try to find a way to stop this firefighting mentality. But overall, if we're looking at what's happening today in the industry and we're looking on the numbers and the open positions in operations, on the general requirements in operations. So I think this is a great movement and companies starts to understand it really early.
Okay, great. And then let's transition, let's move into the future. What do you see in the future? Like, is it more no code automation where ops, basically stop relying on tech teams to fix the back end systems and processes? Like, do we, in our previous conversation when we were prepping for this, we talked a bit about how like there's this tension between like ops being kind of aggregated into one big function versus like disaggregated or decentralized, so that there's like, a revenue ops person sitting in the sales team, a marketing ops person sitting in marketing, there's a customer ops person sitting with customer service or customer success or wherever, which is quite like decentralized. So there are arms everywhere, but not necessarily unified. And that creates a weird matrix structure. Yeah, I guess, where do you think, like in terms of org design, roles, tooling, like where do you see the future of operations evolving, or where do you think it needs to evolve?
Sure. So I as you said, I have few predictions here. I think first of all is obviously, as we mentioned, more companies would adopt the ops driven models and the roles. like RevOps, which is a good thing for us as a community and for every person that think about a career in operations. So again, there are researches that shows that, but a lot of companies are going to adopt those kind of models in the future, which is great. As you mentioned, the second thing is the org structure, and today we still see the ops people reporting to the professional VP, like RevOps to the CRO or sales ops to the VP sales. But they're not talking with each other. And I think more companies starts to understand it today, like the top-down operating model, which in fact means that there is a senior operator. It can be like the VP of BizOps or the COO, that all the operators, the CS ops, the HR ops, the Rev ops, they're all reporting to him, but supporting the professional department. And I think in this way, this could really change the way companies are operating, and it will create more uniform approach for operations and process alignment, and will make the companies more connected. So I think ops people that are part of ops organization can really help with this movement. Third observation or prediction, as you mentioned, is obviously technology. So the no-code revolution will enable us as operators to work better with data without being engineers, and then obviously enabling automations and understanding the data will help us operators to understand and solve inefficiencies and in real time and get the most out of the company's resources. Because at the end of the day, operations is resource management, and the resources of the companies is people and tools. So processes is kind of the bridge between them. So I really believe that technology will help streamline operations and would maximize the value of operators to the company. And again, this is what we're doing in Gluework, like creating a centralized hub for operations and processes. But I would say last but not least, and I think it might be the most important one, is the human capital. I think the tech world, again, this is the place that I'm coming from, is much more open for generalism than in the past. And ops is a great starting point for career change, and people from different backgrounds can find their way into operations. And I really think this movement will promote diversity and creativity. And in the end of the day, it will make companies more successful to have people from different backgrounds in the operations departments.
That's great. And sorry, I have this bad habit of like packaging 3 questions into one. So thank you for addressing multiple of those. So I have 2 follow-up questions. So one is, I'm curious, so Gluework and there's other companies that we're seeing are arising that are kind of not only run by operators, right? So operations leaders who experience some kind of pain point in one or more of their businesses, and then designed and are now, running companies to solve some of those pain points for operations people. I'd love to hear, like, how did you pick the process issue for Gluework? I know you touched a little bit on it earlier, but like, how did you identify this as the problem you wanted to work on? And then could you like kind of talk us through, without giving us like a product demo, just like how would one engage with Gluework, and what is the impact that it could potentially make on your experience as an operations person?
Yeah, sure. I think we chose like the process perspective just because I saw the commonalities between the different roles that I did in operations. And in some of the companies, they used to call me the process guy, not the operations guy, but the process guy. So I was always called for the rescue when there's something is not working. I always felt that it's too late. When you come to fix something, when it's broken already. And after doing some, interviews and trying to understand how people are doing what they should do today, I build a process. But in fact, if you're trying to understand the modern process, so a process, in our perspective, is a set of actions done by people on tools. And what I used to do as an operator is to write very complicated playbooks, a lot of pages explaining exactly what you should do. But when I saw salespeople following the process, they never opened the playbook. They saw it like every quarter. But then in the end of the quarter, you're not meeting the goals. And then I was asking, but why didn't you follow the process? And they're like, oh, come on, this was process from 3 months ago. The company has changed. So we identified the process focus as an important thing that, we're investing time. We understand that it should be measured, but we're not measuring the process. We're just measuring the results. So this is what's inspired us to take those playbooks and those, set of actions that we used to write on playbooks and to really visualize them using data, because now we have, it's 2022 and everyone is using this more or less the same tools to do the work, and we can connect to those tools and really visualize the work. So it's, from one hand, is to save the time of the operator in logging to million tools, all the open tabs, creating reports and dashboards all day, and to really bring, data-driven approach on top of all those tools. So you can really say, okay, now I can measure operations. Now I can measure the success of a process. And of course, to connect it to the company's bottom line. This is what inspired us to focus on processes as part of the work of operations people.
Got it. And I think one of the other things when I just took a look at Gluework, that in addition to just having a process clearly documented in a universal place, I like also the adaptability, because one of the things I think we struggle with in all startups is like you take the time to define a process, and then like something changes, the product changes or the people change, or you figure out new stuff, and so then you're iterating on the process like while you're flying. So yeah. I think what's interesting about having a tool where you're actually documenting processes and measuring the success of them along the way is that you can also change them kind of midstream and then see the impact.
100%.
Okay, well, we're rounding out to our last few minutes. So I wanted to get in one question from the audience we didn't answer yet, and then some rapid fire questions. So for the last question, unless anyone squeezes in a very, very last minute question, do you have any sense of what might be some up and coming, either unknown or kind of lesser known, like best kept secrets or areas of ops that might be worth getting into now? So a great example was that, CRM specialists. So for example, and just to date myself, I was doing CRM implementations when you had a team from Deloitte go on-prem and install software locally. SaaS was not a thing. So, little did I know that actually that CRM background could be useful later as, being a PeopleSoft or Salesforce or, some other CRM specialist. Do you have any sense of best kept secret areas of ops that might be worth getting into?
I think that the two main areas that I would recommend on focusing would be RevOps or HR Ops. And I think the reason is, as we mentioned before, companies are growing really fast, and there is a huge shortage and demand for people. And what companies are really trying to do today is to optimize with the people that they have. So if we can see RevOps versus HR Ops, in RevOps, you're trying to optimize and maximize revenue with the current resources. And by HR processes, you're trying to make your hiring process and to retain employees, which became one of the most critical domains for a company. So definitely those would be the areas that I think strong operations and smart operators can bring the biggest value for companies.
Nice. Financial capital and human capital. Love it.
Yep.
Okay. So to wrap up, we at Operations Nation love Brene Brown. So she loves to do rapid fire questions. So we've personalized 3 for you. So first off, what is one thing you're deeply grateful for right now?
My team, for sure. My co-founder and my team. We're a young company. We're just 6 people now. But I can't be more grateful, for this group of curious, smart, and creative people that challenge us every day and help us, make our dream come true. So our team, for sure.
Oh, well, I hope that some of them are listening to you or will listen to this later and get warm fuzzies. Secondly, what is the one business tool / software, other than Gluework, of course, that you absolutely cannot live without?
I'm an email freak. So, I'm living on my email, and I would say that Slack as a tool, and with the changes in Slack, really helped us to kind of move from emails. So now I can communicate both with employees and with customers and with communities all in the same place. I think it's really like the modern way of communicating. So again, if I'm taking Gluework outside, because Gluework is obviously really helping me, and I'm a big critic of Gluework as a software, but I would say the transition between emails to Slack.
Okay. And then last but certainly not least, fill in the blank. Operations is
The future.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
100%. The future of growing companies. The future of growing companies.
Awesome. Well, we at Operations Nations couldn't agree more. Operations, yeah, has always been in the past. It's fully much in the present and is the future of, I think, all of us helping to make our companies run even more smoothly than they already do, and hopefully getting recognized for making that impact.
For sure.
So as we close out, I just want to give a huge thank you to you, Aviv, for taking time out of your busy founder schedule to share about your journey, what you've learned along the way, giving some really helpful advice to our audience who are at different phases of their ops career, and then just sharing some of your reflections on the evolution of our industry. I know for me, I found this really inspirational and gave me a lot of food for thought. And a huge thank you to everyone who took time out of their busy schedules to attend this event. We will definitely be hosting more conversations in the future with amazing leaders like Aviv. And if you aren't already following us on LinkedIn or Twitter or subscribe to our newsletter, we definitely encourage you to do so. And if you have any feedback, please do share it through, I think you'll get an automated email from Luma. But feel free to drop us a line anytime at team@operationsnation.com. But huge thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
And please do keep in touch. Great.
Bye-bye. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much, everyone.
Have a good weekend.